So, former law partner, in fact, I think he probably is still involved in the law in some way, former law partner, former ACT MP. I don't know if he ever been made a minister, I'll find out in just a second, and commentator on matters legal and political, Stephen Franks, joins us now. Stephen, welcome to the show. Did they ever make you a minister, Stephen?
No, I was, when ACT's numbers went from 9 to 2, after Rodney Hyde became the leader in 2005, I was number 3. So I did the apprenticeship and never served as a minister.
Was there a correlation between the accession of Rodney Hyde and going from 9 to 2?
I thought there was, but there's always multiple causes for the way people vote.
I think you're probably...
Rodney was a very clever and very engaging man, but... The party certainly had some pretty... the people rightly sense when a party has strong internal stress that divided houses don't run very well. And I think that it wasn't surprising that the vote departed.
Yes, well, I think you're probably right. Listen, putting that to one side, there's a constitutional convention in this country, and perhaps you'd explain it first before we get into the discussion of whether it's right or wrong. And I think it's even in the cabinet manual, Stephen, that judges are allowed to make decisions, but for some strange reason are immune from criticism by the people who make the policies or the law that they then interpret. Is that right?
Yeah, it's a very long-standing protocols or conventions, and the cabinet manual reflects them. And yes, they're not supposed to indulge in... The branches are not supposed to demean each other for the same reason we were just discussing. If you've got the ruling elements of any organisation at each other's throats, it doesn't matter how good any individual is or even how good the cause is, it'll fail. And so the notion of comity, which just means overt, conspicuous respect from each side to the other, is a part of that. But it's very much a convention that depends on all parties playing the same game. And Jones is quite rightly incensed that the courts have decided that they'll start making the law. The comity between the courts and Parliament rests on the notion that, or the acceptance that Parliament is supreme. It's parliamentarians can be sacked by the people where they don't have to give any reasoning as soon as they lose confidence in them. Judges are appointed and can't be sacked unless they're basically found to be completely dishonest or some very, very serious error. Parliament theoretically could pass a law to sack judges, and Parliament actually can reverse judicial decisions and could do it very bluntly to say, you got it wrong. But when the system's all working correctly and people are staying in their lanes, none of that is relevant because neither are trying to intrude. What's happened over the last probably 10 years is that the judges have been, they want to be kings, quite bluntly. In a number of cases, a good example is 3 strikes. The Supreme Court just said, we're not going to apply the law where Parliament wrote it. And they've done it a number of times. There's the Fonterra case where the activist has now been told that he can argue that the oil companies and others are responsible to pay personal damages. The Court of Appeal did a perfectly orthodox decision that said this is outrageous.
Is that the Mike Smith case you're talking about?
That's it, yeah. And the Supreme Court then reversed the Court of Appeal. Now, in my view, it was really simple there. The Supreme Court has been getting too big for its boots for some time. The judges have often been discreetly contemptuous of politics and the need to get a majority, appealing to all the... This is a class war thing. All societies suffer from it, and they, in their leafy suburbs and their dinner groups, despise the people who don't share their passions. And we're getting courts that are getting out of... They're leaving their lane. So it's not surprising that judges are jumping on it. I mean, I felt sorry a year or so ago when the Labour Minister, Stuart Nash, was dumped because he criticised judges. It is perfectly proper for politicians to criticise judgments. They're supposed to be respectful when they do it, but that's just comedy. That's not the law. That is just a convention that the elements of power should be mutually supportive.
I think that was to do with Operation Cobalt, wasn't it, when Stuart Nash criticised a decision to do with striking down or police actions or something like that. And
I can't remember the
dates back, I think, about a couple of years ago,
that's right,
Stephen.
Yeah.
But again, and the important point about that is that he was the police minister of the time, saying this is a ridiculous decision because essentially it makes our streets unsafer and puts a whole series of illegal arms potentially back on the streets. And he had a crack. He got criticised for that, ironically, by the now National Party back then for not staying in his lane. But surely that kind of judicial activism that we're talking about, and I was just talking about the Treaty of Waitangi this morning, Stephen, it even goes back to the 1980s when the then Court of Appeal determines this is what the Treaty of Waitangi means. Was that different than this latest case to do with marine title, or do you think that was because the government hadn't done its job and courts were required to do so?
Well, to be fair, the courts had no alternative but to invent principles, because the 1975 Act on setting up the Waitangi Tribunal, used that term. And on conventional approaches, the judges are supposed to accept that Parliament means something. In fact, as we know, because David Longley and other ministers have said it, Geoffrey Palmer told the Cabinet much later that those references didn't have a real legal meaning, that they were just kind of fluff comfort words for iwi. But that's not something the courts are supposed to do. They're not supposed to say that the law doesn't mean nothing and we'll just ignore it. So when they invented the principles, and the analogy of a partnership later morphed into people treating it as if it was real, it's pretty hard to blame the courts, because Parliament was deliberately using politically fluffy language and legislation, which it should never do.
Listen, I agree with you.